So I'm Matt Wojtowicz. I work for a company in site now doing GDPR compliance, but previously I was at another company and we did a giant migration from a monolith in JSP on the front end over to microservices and Angular 2. So I'm kind of just going to walk us through 6 months of my life in 15 minutes and gloss over a lot of things, but please ask questions if you want me to dive deeper into anything that I talk about, kind of the architecture as it evolved over the 6 months as we migrated. So at the company I was at before, Item Master, we built, it was a software called the PIM. So we basically managed all the items for like Peapod and some Amazon websites. So like companies would come in with UPCs as well as images and descriptions, and we'd upload it to Walmart.com, Amazon.com, Peapod.com. So that's kind of like the idea of what we were doing. And then so kind of how it worked was we had basically one giant server that ran Spring. Tell me if you can't read anything. And basically inside of the single monolith, we had our JSP, so Java server pages, like PHP for people that aren't familiar. We had Java APIs, and then we also had things for like reporting, jobs, as well as we also had some charting and some emails, sending out was also done from here. So basically we had a giant blob of everything the company did on one server, and we just spread it out and spent as much money as possible to keep it up. Basically, like if reporting was going hard and there was a bunch of clients on our site and we were also sending out API integrations, like it could take everything down because we just crashed the one server. So as we moved over to the new system, we decided that the first thing to do was going to be our item services with our JSPs. So we're going to pull out all the stuff that we integrated with our items and the CRM on top of that. And we're also going to move over from JSPs into Angular 2. So kind of the first steps going that way were we pulled out, so that's kind of V1. And then V2, we had basically Spring was still running. But now we had basically an item service. And then that talked to our database. And then we had our new thing for Angular came in. So now we had basically just, So kind of how we moved everything out into Angular 2 was we decided first to take over items, but we only did the reading of data at the moment. We didn't worry about authentication. We were just going to have a plain regular application that just showed the retrieval of data. Basically, we had no auth. We had no create, update, and delete, and that happened. And we no search either. So the whole point of doing it this way was this was basically a big unknown at the moment for us to be able to get it done. And so we wanted to just have the smallest thing that we can have to not only feel that we had the technical know-how to get it out there, but also to have something at the end that we can begin selling. Instead of showing our old JSP pages, we could start to begin to sell the new application written in Angular 2 with material design and things on top of that. So we get that out there, and basically how it then works is we have, we use CloudFront. So whenever you went to basically PIM, item, ID, you would get just shot to the new auth API, but if you were inside of edit, it basically shoots you back to the old Spring application. So this allowed us to keep the new item ID stuff up at the same time as running it. Basically, we also had a feature flag that was inside, so we checked if, so I think it was like, so we had a feature flag on top of it too, because we wanted it to be so that if you had newer clients, we're basically okay with it, so we tell them to use this one to look at their items in the site, but our old clients still didn't want to see the new site yet until everything was migrated over. So basically, having the AWS do some routing as well as having kind of an understanding with the clients and turning on feature flags on and off for them, we're able to kind of run these both in parallel. So that's kind of first step, and basically how we get there is myself and a junior dev are just working together. Our team was 7 total at the time. The rest are working either on the item service being built or on maintaining the old application. And so as the two of us work that out and get it to release, then we begin ramping up the other team. Basically, myself had Angular 1 experience, and then the other dev had React experience, so we were the most front-end heavy of all our full-stack developers. And so then we also didn't want to have everyone pile on while we still didn't know what the hell was going on in Angular 2. And so then that's all just kind of hard-coded deployed out there. And then phase 3 is starting to bring in the rest of the team, and as well as getting CI/CD in. So kind of now how the Angular app's working is we need to get authentication in. We need to get item listing. So basically, because now we have authentication, we could get item lists that you would have instead of just our static data from before. And then we also start doing updates as well. And then we start to bring in CI/CD. So before it was just us developing, and then me and another dev, and then we brought in the rest of the team in this phase once CI/CD was in place. So basically, we had Docker images that would build the Angular application then, and then it would pump it up to CloudFront, and then we would just route to that instead of before it was just another directory actually on the same EC2 instance when we had our Spring. So then we move over to CI/CD. Basically, we start to have some of the older devs from that built the JSP working on the application. They're loving it. They love TypeScript. They love basically being able to write Spring applications as a front-end application. We start to get a little more problems with them moving over to observables and observable services in Angular 2. But really be able to get, I believe it's Christoph Stultz and some of his work with Cycle.js. He has a lot of documentation on how observables work. We're able to ramp up the team together and get that working. And then finally, final stage is basically all CRUD works, and then we begin to work on search, as then begin to bring in reporting, and then at that point we start to bring in our offshore team. And that's really when we kick the tires as developing on this, because now we are always having problems with the offshore team, just styles of coding. And then once we were all working on Angular 2, and Angular 2's kind of guide rails to keep you in how you do design, no more long PR processes were happening. We're all just kind of understanding. We just needed to know the problem that needed to be solved instead of the architecture we would have liked to see in the application. From the JSP, which was also kind of a hodgepodge of ExtJS and jQuery. But now it's just, you just do the Angular stuff. Here's Angular documentation. And we all just accept the way Angular tells us to do it. And it really, we go from not working well with the offshore team to actually working really well and enjoying our time together. And then that's kind of the final step. And then also throughout the process, we're like increasing test coverage as well as, what else do we get going. Oh, and then all our search and item updates before in the JSP page was a lot of going back and forth. We start doing that in the background with hot updates. So just user appreciation starts increasing as well of the new product. And then we get everything moved over. That's basically kind of when I left the company. And then they ended up selling to a big Chicago CPG company to kind of bring in all these different item management companies together. So, and they still use the front end that we built and brought up the new products into that one. So any questions, kind of how I went about it? Any kind of talk about pros and cons? Yeah.
So you guys went from JSP to Angular 2?
Yeah.
That seems like a huge jump in logic. And especially because you said you had Angular 1 experience and the other dev who was working on it with you had React experience.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come about that decision that Angular 2 was the right thing to use as opposed to React?
So we went with Angular 2 mainly because of TypeScript. Basically, we thought it was the most similar to Spring. So just like you saw extension of base CRUD, like you could go into the Spring actual code and see something just like that, and how they handle the controllers for their MVC framework. So that was the main reason for moving over to that, as well as a lot of developers, their main complaint when we talked about moving more into just straight JavaScript instead of JSPs was they wanted their types. So we were able to get that out of the way real quick with TypeScript too. Yeah. What else? Anyone else?
What were the main cons you were having with JSP within
the main problem with JSP was the app was feeling old, and it was becoming a selling point to competitors that they were SPA applications or Web 2.0, and we were still Web 1.10. And then, so we needed to freshen up the look with material design, as well as having like quick searches, as well as not having to do back and forth every time you change the name of something and things like that. So it was mainly to sell the app a lot easier. Another thing we got that we wanted was testing too. That was a big one to have the migration over. And then just in the cons that we had from Angular going forward was, as I talked about, observables were a big problem for us just to get our heads wrapped around it. It also, that was about a month of working with the other devs to get them really up and going with the ways that you pipe data through Angular 2 and getting services. Basically, it was still early for Redux or any of those data store services to be used. So we're kind of wrapping it ourselves with behavioral subjects in our ExtJS. We never got forms working. I still don't know how reactive forms work in Angular. We ended up just doing basically everything ourselves and changing in inputs and the HTML ourselves there. Oop.